Welcome to this edition of Soul of Warren County. I'm your host, Mickey Gwynn. Urban renewal, or urban redevelopment, as it's also known, has been around since the early 1900s in America and other countries. And in theory, it's a novel idea. You destroy the old and impoverished, build new, and hope to revitalize those areas. Urban renewal made its presence in Warren County and McMinnville in 1969. That original project was to widen Colville Street, add additional parking spaces behind the downtown business area, and also destroy an area known as Egypt Alley. But it also continued into the 1970s, where it took large swaths of land and homes in the East End neighborhoods of McMinnville, our neighborhood. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the positives and negatives of urban renewal coming through the East End of McMinnville. In the studio with me today, I have, first of all, Miss Rita Ramsey. Rita, welcome.
Thank you.
And also another member of the greatest graduating class ever in the history of Warren County Senior High School, the class of 1975, Wayne Evans. Welcome, Wayne.
Thank you, Mick.
Let me read something to y'all and see what you think about this. This is from an article published by called the Heritage Development Plan. And it says, in 1965, funds were advanced for urban renewal projects in McMinnville that included the clearance of slum areas near the business district and the construction of a roadway south of the business district along the route of Colville Street. A second urban renewal project was approved in 1969, designated the Beersheba Heights Project. Several structures important to the African American community, such as Clark United Methodist Church, were torn down as a result of urban renewal. Other losses in the African American community to urban renewal included the homes of several in the community and the Coke Lane Church on the Hill. When I first read this article, and I had to do some research, because I can't rely on my memory anymore. I was trying to think back of the dates and everything. But the first thing that jumped in my mind where it says clearance of slum areas. Now, I always imagined slums being in New York or Detroit or DC or even in third world countries. Thinking back growing up, would you ever have said to someone, well, we have slums in McMinnville? I just that word caught my attention early on that they use that term. Now I know there were some areas that were impoverished, I guess you could say, but I guess I never considered areas around McMinnville actually being slums. But I guess that Egypt Alley, I vaguely remember the name of Egypt Alley that was sort of down there between Colville Street and Depot Bottom. It was sort of in that area. And then I heard people talk about Sloppy Rock, that area that went away when urban renewal came through. But I guess I just never would have called those areas slums.
Neighborhood.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was a neighborhood. It's interesting that they said that. But I know we were sort of young when all the urban renewal stuff was going on, and I know we're going to be relying on our memories of what we thought about during that time. And if we can, sort of remember what our parents were going through or anything they mentioned to us, what we're going to talk about today. But I guess you don't realize till you get older how much of an impact it had on you at that age. I know I was in high school right when we had to leave and things of that nature. So that's the kind of thing we want to get into today. Now, Rita, y'all were living right down off on Edgefield.
We were living on Edgefield.
Okay. And
we were right next to Leroy Ramsey.
Okay.
Right next to him on Edgefield.
Okay. And I remember Wayne, I always thought Wayne had one of the better houses in all of, or location-wise, in all of McMinnville. Because he was just up the street from Miss Lethy's Cafe.
Hey,
in between there and Bernard.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the school where, the swimming pool was and everything. And I can remember those days of going over to Wayne's and, he'd be coming up the street from Miss Lethy's Cafe, and I knew he had a hamburger.
About the greasy side.
Yeah, before he got home, you could see the grease stains coming through it. But those were some good hamburgers, wasn't it? But I remember that. Now, do y'all remember sort of the first conversations from your folks about maybe having to move out of that area? Do y'all remember that at all?
I just caught wind that we was gonna get another house. Pretty much that's all I knew.
Yeah.
In the Leesburg area, they were building maybe FHA hood houses in that area at the time.
Right.
And we'd ride out there every weekend just to look, see what was going on. And I think we found out which one we was actually gonna get. And it was, I was excited about that, but at the same time, it hadn't sunk in on the friends I was gonna leave.
Yeah. Now y'all went to Leesburg. Now your family sort of went across town.
We went to North Spring Street.
Yeah.
And that was like a cultural shock for us because we were the youngest people in that neighborhood. And then like the neighbor across the street, which was an elderly white lady, sat there and said, they don't belong in this neighborhood, and here we are having to move to find another home. And it wasn't because we didn't think that at the time. And that stuck in my mind. Of course, here I am 13 listening to this lady across the street telling my family that, and we're just trying to better, we have to move.
Right.
Because if we had a choice, honestly, the neighborhood, you mentioned the slum areas, I don't think anyone of us would have ever called it a slum area.
Right,
Because then, like Wayne said, it was a neighborhood. And everyone knew everyone.
Even though they say you might have been poor, but you didn't know it.
Right. Yeah.
We was happy.
And pretty much everyone around us was in the same sort of situation. I mean,
Right.
It was like the only family that I sort of looked at that I thought were well off when you looked at their house and all was the Martins, Mr. Howard,
Yeah.
Martin, because they had that big sort of plantation house with the big columns in front and all that. Now, I always felt, they were rich because they had that
Exactly.
nice big house up there,
Yeah.
on Eder Street. But I talked to my mom years later about the house that we had down there at the end of East Main, because as you remember, there was our house, and across the street was Mr. Wilson, and down on farther was where Chris Biles and them were at. And I was talking to her about that house, and she said, well, we only paid $1,300 for that house. And I said, you mean $13,000, right? She said, no, we paid $1,300 for that house. And when we moved in, it had no indoor toilet. There was an outhouse right out the back door of the house. It did have running water, but it only had running water to the sink in the kitchen. I mean, there was no, like let's say bathroom. There was no washer, dryer in the house. None of that stuff like that. And the people who lived there had, burned coal and wood in the stove and stuff. And they had just went and dumped the ashes at the end of the porch. And there was an old shed out there that was full of beer cans and stuff like that. We got you remember Mr. Frank Ford? Mm-hmm. He brought his wagon and his mules down there.
He lived next door.
And he took all that stuff off, to the landfill. It was, I guess, at that point out in Leesburg, I guess, when it was out there.
Yeah.
He took all that stuff off, tore that old shed down, and my mom and dad, made a nice home out of it. But you can imagine, a $1,300 home, it didn't have any insulation in it, whatsoever. They had some sheetrock and things put on the wall, but they didn't put any insulation behind it. And my uncle they called Frog, lived upstairs in the attic. And as I got older and got my own houses and things like that, he lived upstairs in the attic. But there was nothing between the roof and the floor. There was no
insulation.
Drywall. There was no sheetrock. It was like there was the beams, and then there was a tin roof. And it got hot up there in the summer with that tin roof up there and no air conditioning, nothing whatsoever. It got hot up there in that attic, but we still go up there and play. We go up the stairs and go up there and play. But that gives you sort of an idea of the kind of house that we had. But like I say, it was fine.
It was fine.
Well, I think we had a 2-bedroom block house. I think our rent was like $25 a month. And me looking now, it was hard for them to get that money up.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, just the fact that they were able to buy a house. Like we stayed with a number of people and rented houses up on East Main there. We were talking about the houses beside the Wooders where the funerals were held. We lived in one of the houses right across the street from Mr. Eulis, where he had his barbershop. And there was a house, you remember where Miss Bessie Gwynn lived. There was a house beside hers, and I don't know who owned that house. We were renting it, but we lived there for a while, and then we moved when they bought the house down there on East Main Street. So But like you say, that was the neighborhood, and I didn't feel like I was deprived. That was just the way
And they
things
didn't-
were. And I do remember that some of that conversation about urban renewal,
Right.
and Daddy going to meetings uptown about what they were going to do and things. And even at that time, there were divisions between people who wanted it to come through and people who didn't want it to come through. And I think my folks sort of looked at it as an opportunity sort of to do better. Probably like both of your parents did. They looked at it as an opportunity to do better. But then again, like you say, they were adults. We were kids, and we had
Didn't
those
have
kind of
no say-so.
reputations,
No.
You were mentioned earlier, Wayne, about once y'all went to, was there any? Do you remember any talk about why y'all went to Leesburg, or you were just going to Leesburg?
I just saw it as an opportunity. I don't know why we went that way.
Yeah, because it seemed like
They were
there-
building that area
Yeah,
up
they,
at that time.
yeah.
A lot of those houses in the area were built at that time after urban renewal came through.
Right, right.
So a lot of, I don't know which families actually moved from town, but I know a lot of us lived in town and went to Leesburg or Bowling Green
Right.
or the predominantly black areas at that time. And I don't know how many houses were built at that time.
And I think it seemed like that was the case. People either went to Leesburg or to Bowling Green or just somewhere totally different. Like, y'all moved over on Spring Street. We ended up way out off Sparta Highway on Crane Road out there. And, my mom probably would never admit it, but, my mom has always been a strong personality. But I can almost guarantee you the reason we didn't end up in Leesburg or Bowling Green is because she didn't want to go where everybody else was going.
I got you.
I mean, I just think that was probably her mindset at the time, and I was so upset about having to leave that I never even went to the house we moved into until the day they moved. I mean, I was in school. They were moving during the day at school, and they were moving, and they'd gone out and looked at the house, and they'd asked me a couple times, "You want to go look at the house?" And I said, "No, don't want to go." And the day that we moved in was the first time I ever seen that house. I mean, I was that much against it, and I tried to talk them into letting me stay in town with Robert, my cousin Robert Biles, to stay in town with them. Of course, they wasn't having that. So yeah, I mean, I can remember it was sort of a traumatic time for me,
It was.
And you were talking about having the bus
The
situation.
bus ride home went from 30 minutes to an hour and 45,
And that made a big difference. And I remember that was about the same time that we were starting to drive. And Kathy was already driving. And she was the one that would bring us in town. And I always felt, we drive in town because we couldn't take the bus from out there. We drove in town to catch the bus to go to school. And I'm like, why are we out here? We got to drive in town to catch the bus. And that's really when I started driving a lot. Because Kathy, I don't know if y'all remember, she was a manager for the girls basketball team, and they were going to the state tournament, and she had to go. So I remember my mama telling me, "You got to drive," because Daddy was working for Highs at that time, and he went into work real early. She said, "Well, you're going to have to drive me to work and take Mark to school and that kind of stuff." So I guess if anything else, it made me have to start driving more. I guess I could say that, but I wasn't happy. I mean, we were out there. The Crabtrees were out there.
Yes.
The Crabtrees were living out there. But other than that, we were definitely out in the country. And that's what we always called it, when we lived out in the country. We stayed out there for a number of years. And then I think the reverse happened. When the kids started to leave, Larry left and went to college, and then he moved to Nashville. I went in the Air Force. Kathy got married and moved to Smithville with Steve. So that only left Mark. And then Mark, went to college after that. And it's almost like, they are empty nesters out here in the country by themselves.
Yeah.
So where'd they end up? Back in town. So it's just sort of funny how that worked out. But yeah, if I look back on it, and by all means, y'all can tell me how y'all felt, from a standpoint of maybe doing better, housing wise, I think you can't deny the fact that we all did better housing wise. But it basically destroyed the neighborhood.
It
It
did.
did.
You know, it
Yeah,
basically restored the
even
neighborhood.
though I went from, like I said, I went from a coal stove to, now I got central heat. Didn't have the air yet.
Right.
But we had, we had the heat still. I had to put the
Right.
air conditioning in the window. It was different.
But, you know, we were able to walk everywhere, you know, and play with everybody. I mean, it wasn't no issues with, you know, places you couldn't go in the neighborhood and things like that. But, you know, all that went away.
Yeah.
You know, and I still don't know the people who built back down in the neighborhood that are like there now. I don't know sort of how that came about. I don't know if those were people that decided just not to leave. I was asking Robert about that because, you know, his family built back down
Right.
on Cedar Street, and he, as he remembered, he said he thought they were looking to get some place with some land, but they were going to have to go maybe to Viola or Marson somewhere. They didn't want to go that far out, so they ended up just building back down there. And there's few people who built back down there, which I think was an option. I guess you had that option of building back down in the neighborhood.
Okay.
But, you know, just by that time, so many people had left. You know, it just wasn't the same.
I don't remember an option of building back, but I remember a crunch time that we had to be out. Because I remember conversations between my mom and my dad, and of course my mom didn't drive at the time.
Right.
And she's like, you're not gonna stick me out in the country somewhere where I can't get where I need to be.
Right.
So that was part of, you know, her decision to go to Spring Street around one time we looked at a house over on West Sparta Street, and we ended up on Spring Street. But I know that was one of her decisions was that.
Yeah.
Because our land is still empty, you know, where we moved from is still empty.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody just a week or so ago, and I guess there is even still some dispute on the land down there still. Some of it, I guess, is city owned, but some of it also is privately owned, and there's, I guess, some dispute on where actually boundaries are with some of that properties down there because of what supposedly the city owns and what supposedly is private property. So they're still debating those things. But you know, I was joking with Kathy the other day. I said, as I remember back during that time, I don't remember anybody saying we were going to move out to Westwood. I don't remember.
We didn't. No, we didn't go that. We didn't go that area.
I don't think
Halloween,
that was an option at
Halloween
that time.
maybe. Had we going Halloween?
I was like, yeah, I don't remember anybody saying, yeah, we're going to move to Westwood. Because, you know, Westwood during that time was probably the ritziest part of McMill, you think? Mm-hmm. Probably so, yeah. But I know we didn't have those kind of conversations.
You know, we didn't know what was past Hardee's.
No. Well, Hardee's wasn't there.
Well, I mean, when Hardee's first came and
Right.
the smoke, the charboiling the burgers and stuff, we seen the smoke, but we couldn't tell you what was past it.
Right, yeah.
Just
We
didn't have
never
no
had to
reason to
go
go. Didn't have to
past
go
it.
past it. You
We
know.
never, I mean, we had our own grocery store, we had our own beauty shops, we
Mm-hmm.
had our own restaurants. You know, there was no need to go past
No.
our community.
No, because we, like you say, you know, Mr. James Ramsey had his store, and then of course Mr. George Holland had that store down on Bursker Street. Across
a
the
Dairy
street
Queen?
was Dairy Queen, you know, where we used to go to all the time. And like we was talking about all the ladies that were doing hair, and Mr. Eulis, you know, was a barber. So yeah, it was a self-contained neighborhood. Of course, then we had the school. That was our recreation, you know,
Right.
between the swimming pool and the gym. You know, we had a self-contained neighborhood, and you know, churches were all there. You know, no matter what faith you were, you could go to church in the neighborhood. But like I say, a lot of that's changed. And I know things change. I mean,
Right.
you know, things aren't going to always stay the same. But I guess when you sort of mandated by the government to make changes, you know, it's a little bit different than when you just do that on your own. But like we always say, they're good and bad. You
Yeah.
know, I
There
think
are.
it definitely helped my folks get a better house, and that better house led to another house in town that was a nice house. So it was an interesting time going through that.
Well, another thing that's changed, you know, when we started playing organized ball, you know, when we lived in town, you know, we had to walk to practice, and walk back home. When you move out Leesburg, there's no walking to practice and walking. You find a ride. Of course, we rode with Patty Martin a lot of times.
Right.
You know, other parents would come by and pick you up. They see you walking, but you couldn't do it on a regular basis.
I was telling my daughters, and because my grandson's playing coach pitch now, of baseball. And of course, we take him to practice, and you know, he's got a bag, and he's got his bat, and he's got all this, you know, this stuff, and he's 6 years old. And I was telling them about there was a time, cause my mama didn't drive either at that time, and Daddy was working. He'd come pick me up, and I would walk from all the way down there on the end of East Main Street, all the way over to they had that field behind William Bowes. I'd walk all the way over there, some down
That
to
was the minor
practice.
league field.
And then every now and then, like I know Coach Paz was one of my first coaches, and the Turner boys were coaches. Every now and then, if they didn't have anything to do, they would maybe give me a ride back home. But there were many times I made that trip back,
Right.
Yeah.
and never thought twice about what else you gonna do.
What else you gonna do?
You're gonna walk, or just you don't get to go to practice. So I didn't want to miss that.
You remember we'd ride the pep bus and we'd get back. Well, everybody else's cars, you could see the smoke come out of the exhaust where it'd be cold. We just jump in the middle of the street, start walking. Didn't think a thing about it,
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the way everybody was, till we got older and started getting cars and things. But, most of the families had cars, during that time. But a lot of times, like you mentioned, only one member of the family drove. So you had to be real, selective on where you took people and where you could go and things of that nature. And that was our case. If Daddy was busy, then we had to figure out another way until, like Larry, my older brother, got old enough to drive, and then he could take us sometime. But yeah, we used to make those trips and never thought anything of it. You was talking about going over, going past Hardage. What you remember the health department used to be over. You remember? Well, that's probably before Rita's time, but she's younger than me.
I am younger.
But you remember when the
Behind
health
the tire
department?
mart?
Yeah, where that tire mart. I can remember when we would have to get our
Vaccination shot.
for school. We would walk over. I mean, it would be 10 of us walking over, all the way from down in the neighborhood, across town, to the health department to get our vaccinations for school. Once again, never thought nothing about it.
Didn't even have your parents with you.
Yeah, never even thought nothing about it. That was just the way things were. Didn't worry about anybody bothering you or anything like that, because you knew everybody
Right.
in the neighborhood, and you knew if you got out of line, you were going to get it from them, and then when it got home to your parents, you were going to get it.
That's what I said. Well,
That's what we're talking about.
You will get it again.
Didn't have to have cell phones at that time to communicate,
No.
because before you got home, the word was already
Already
there.
there.
Yeah, and I'm sure too. Remember, my mama coming to the back door and just hollering your name.
Yeah.
Just holler.
You knew you were somewhere in the neighborhood, but she would just come out the back door and just holler your name. You
Yes.
come home, time for dinner or whatever.
Or you knew once those street lights went out. You had to be home before that street light went out, because the street light went out and you wasn't in the house, you were in trouble.
Yeah. And then it seemed like as we got older, it was 10 o'clock. You had to be home at 10 o'clock. And as a kid, I always wondered, what happened after 10 o'clock?
Whatever happened after 10, yeah.
Whatever happens after 10 o'clock.
Did you
My-
test it?
No. We would go, you remember, I don't know if you remember where we live, Cedar Street, there was that sort of little hill, and we lived down that hill right there off of Cedar Street. And there was some nights we would come from the school, from the gym, and we would be up there playing out of those lights, and it'd be right about 10 o'clock when we would get there. But we would go home and say, we're up on the hill. We'd be up there just playing and talking, that kind of thing. But other than that, no, we didn't test at 10 o'clock, because like I say, I don't know what happened until, you might have vaporized at 10 o'clock.
You don't know.
I didn't want to find out. So yeah, that was that second sort of curfew you had growing up as a kid, was telling my mom, you got to be there at 10 o'clock. And yeah, we was there. We was there at 10 o'clock.
But that was it. Your parents didn't worry about you being out, because they knew where you were. Because we didn't wander out of that community at that time very often.
Yeah.
So they knew where you were going to be.
And even the times that we did, we would go to Leesburg or Bowling Green. And I just think back, we would walk all the way out
Walk out there just
on
cause
Sunday after church.
A few of them had ponies out there.
Right.
We'd walk out there. Hopefully they let us ride.
Right.
But most time we'd watch them ride.
Yeah, it was that way. When we did go outside the neighborhood, we were going to another black neighborhood, and that was sort of okay too, because once again, the people in those neighborhoods would let your folks know you've been out there.
Right.
So that wasn't.
We called ourselves having a little organized ball between ourselves.
Right.
The town versus the project versus Leesburg. Well, when everything separated, now what happened to the town people?
Went away.
Went away.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you bring that up. That was something else that I was confused on. I thought the housing projects down there was part of the urban renewal. So I was trying to do some research, and I was told to call over to the housing authority, Ms. Bassham over there, who she acknowledged has been working for the housing authority ever since there was a housing authority. She's been
Right.
there like 50 something years. And I was asking her, I said, can you clarify in my mind, was the housing projects down there off of Berkshire Street part of the urban renewal? And she said, oh no, that came well before that.
I thought it did too.
Yeah. She said it came well before that. 'Cause I told her, I said, I remember as a child going down to the Rockets ball games when the field was turned in the opposite direction, and they were building the homes down there at that time, and we would just sort of walk through and see what they had done, and then later on, as they were getting close to completion, they started sort of announcing who was going to get which house down there. And I said, I can't remember how old I was. I just remember I was a kid going down to the games, and we'd walk back through the neighborhood on the way back. And she said, yeah, she said the first one opened in '65, I think she said.
Okay.
And that it wasn't part of that urban renewal project. That was the first McMinnville Housing Authority establishment, was those homes down there. And I said, okay, that clarifies things for me, because I, for some reason, thought it was part of the urban renewal project, but it came before.
I think the other ones came after the urban renewal projects.
Down in
the
the
one
bottom.
off of Edgefield and
Right.
Yeah.
And the ones over
and
on,
off of East Main and
South,
those.
Hardaway over there.
Yeah.
They came later on too. She mentioned that too, that they came later, but that was the very first one, and she even, mentioned who was the first two families that moved in. And she's got a mind like a steel trap on what all happened back during that time. But so there was a lot of changes during that time, and she brought up something that I guess was sort of thought about when we was growing up. But she was saying how it seemed like that people had a stigma about moving down to the housing projects, that it was, I don't know,
You couldn't have anything to live in the projects.
Yeah.
Like, not the slums, but like everybody thought that people that lived in the projects were the poorest.
yes.
And that wasn't the stigma. I mean, it seemed like a stigma at that time, but that was just how they were judged, by living in the project.
Yeah. And she said that still happens today, and she said we really try to educate teachers and even bus drivers on, the concept, because, you don't want kids thinking that, they're any worse than other kids or whatever, because they live there. But I remember, back during that time when there was talk about that, but you mentioned about the ball team. They were the projects. We played the projects. The
field was there.
Yeah, that's just the way things were. But I mean, that was, once again, I think, was a stepping stone for a lot of families. They were down there, but probably the vast majority of the ones that were in there initially, unless they were older, moved out and went to other places. And then it seemed like, as time went on, there was a little bit older group of people down there versus when they first opened up. So yeah, that was interesting that came well before the urban renewal project came through. So, but what do you think? I mean, now you can only speak for your families, of course. I mean, you can't speak for everybody. You think it was good and bad?
Good and
Looking
bad.
back, good and bad.
It was good and bad. It was good. Like I said, it's good that you got something new. That you call yours.
Mm-hmm.
Where we lived at, we rented. You understand?
Right.
And but from the other standpoint, a lot was missed. Friendships were lost. I mean, not lost, but
They were harder to
They were
have.
harder to have. Yeah.
Because of the fact that you had to, drive into town.
Yeah.
To renew things, and sometimes that was a bit of a pain trying to do that, especially when you were at that point where you hadn't gotten your own car yet and you're still driving the family car, and there only may have been one. So yeah, that made it harder. You
I
read
think-
good, bad?
I think there was good and bad. Like, it did change some of the housing that we had. It was an improvement. Like you talked about the wood and the coal. I remember looking at our stove sometimes, and it would be so red you would think the house was
Yeah.
going to catch on
Oh,
fire.
I can remember looking outside the door. There'd be snow, and our front door would be wide open.
Yeah, but that was the warmest heat ever.
Ever.
And now you smell coal and wood, and you're like, oh man, that stunk.
Mm-hmm.
but that was all we knew, so it was fun.
Yeah.
Now, like Wayne said, the bad was we lost our sense of community. You know, we lost our sense of what we knew growing up. Our children, of course, aren't as close because
No.
they didn't know each other. They didn't grow up knowing what we knew or enjoy the life that we knew.
Yeah.
And of course, now we try to make it better for our children. So, I mean, I think that's part of what our kids should have known or, you know, experienced. They would have been better off.
I mean, as close as me and Mickey are right now, his kids don't know my kids.
Right.
No.
Mine don't know his. You know,
No.
it's just a fact. You know.
That's just the way things were. You know, I brought up a memory when you talked about the stove and the fire and all. That was always my clue that summer was there.
When
Daddy
they
took the
stopped.
stove down. When he took the stove down, he took the stove down. He took that flue out of the wall.
cleaned it
all
up.
that
Ours
stuff.
stayed up year round.
You know, that was always my clue that yeah, summer's on the way. And then when we get into summer, like I say, in them hot days, and I can remember many nights, you know, in our bedroom with the window up, with my foot in the windowsill, trying to get a little bit of a breeze on your foot, trying to cool you off.
And you know, you take that Saturday night bath, and you get out and you still sweating.
Yeah. To cool you off. You know, it just seemed like sometimes those fans that were going were blowing hot air.
Just hot air, yeah.
You know, so, but like I say, those were the good old days. Those were the good old days.
Wouldn't take nothing for them.
No, wouldn't either. And I think I'm the same way y'all are. I think there was good things that happened when the urban renewal came. So the neighborhood and the friendships and the relationships.
You know, the
with
stories
family.
that's probably told walking from place to place at night, you know, in the middle of the street, you know.
Oh, yeah. That and coming up to Park Theater, and that was another story I tell my girls. I said at one time we had to sit in the balcony of the Park Theater, and I said after you know they integrated things and things of that nature, you had to pay extra to sit in the balcony. So I said I guess we didn't realize we were sitting in the premium seats at one time, you know. But yeah, things have just changed. But like I say, being young and the neighborhood that we grew up in, and just you know doing those things that our kids never did, and kids coming on after, they're like my grandson, will never do.
They'll never
Right.
do
You
it.
know, all you can do is just tell them about it, and most of the time they look at you like, what are you talking about? You know? There was a time where there wasn't a Game Boy. There was a time where you didn't have cable TV, you know, and I said, yeah, we had cable TV, but 2 or 3 of the stations were the same station.
Same station,
They weren't all, you know, unique station. It might be CBS, but it was CBS cable from Chattanooga and CBS from Nashville. So it wasn't like cable you know now. So y'all just on it. Of course, our folks told us those kind of stories to
Right.
us, you know,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
about what they grew up with, you know, not having a TV.
But then we were outside so much, you know, that we didn't even miss TV. But I mean,
No, we didn't.
We didn't really watch as much TV as people do now because we were always outside or
wanted to be
in the
outside.
swimming pool or playing just outside in the neighborhood.
Court ball.
Yeah.
Getting court ball.
Foursquare and
Foursquare.
We'd have Foursquares games.
Trying
You didn't have
skate.
East End
You know, if you
Drive.
didn't have chalk, you had to make it out of rock.
Rock.
You know,
Just run it
drawing
in
on
a
the
rock.
pavement.
Yeah, those were the
Right.
good old days. Well, folks, thanks for coming in and reminiscing with me. Like I say, I think like anything else, there's good and bad when these kind
There
of programs
is.
go through. It helped in some ways. A lot of ways, it really did help our families. But as you say, that you know, breaking up the neighborhood when you're kids is tough. But really appreciate y'all coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. I'm Mickey Gwynn, and join us for the next edition of Soul of Warren County. Until then, make today and every day a great day.